All right, I believe that we should be live. Thank you for joining us today. We have a very special program. Today, we're going to be continuing our look at the history of atheism. We're often told that atheism is mere lack of belief in a God, that an atheist doesn't care about religion in any way, any shape, or any form. However, when we look into the history, we see that every important atheist thinker did not want to just say, I personally don't believe in God, and that's all there is to it. Every single one of them wanted to get rid of Christianity and replace it with something else. The something else varied slightly from person to person, but they all wanted to replace it with something. And generally, they all wanted to be the head of this new pseudo church that they were setting up. Very interesting considering that, atheists are just in a state of non belief and have no opinions other than that. We're joined, of course, today by Lloyd. Do you want to say a few words of introduction?
A few words of introduction. Thank you, Thaddeus.
Uh, all right. Let me open us with prayer before we dive into the presentation. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this time together. We thank you for the technology and the opportunity to connect with one another, to connect with believers and to connect with unbelievers. We ask that everyone who is watching approach the material with an open mind, that they not simply dismiss it because it doesn't match up with what they've heard before, but rather look into what we're saying, investigate it, see if what we're saying is accurate. And then, if it is, ask yourself what that means about your own beliefs. We ask that you be with us today, that you guide our discussion, and you prevent us from theological error. We ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Let me get my screen up here. If you want to share your slides, I can bring those up.
All right, let me figure out your screen too. There we go. And awesome. I believe we are sharing.
Yes. Let me add it to the scene, and there we go. Everyone should be able to see that now.
Awesome, right. So, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. My apologies. It is my fault that we are running so late. So, thank you for waiting. Thank you for being here. Yes, as Thaddeus opened up with, atheism, once you examine the history of modern atheism, is actually a religious movement. In fact, it is a political, social cause wrapped up in religion in what one would call, or what is now the functional concept of religion, as in not the substantive concept of religion, in which a substantive concept would mean that we have God and we worship God and we live our lives in accordance with the divine moral law of God. The functional view is, what does religion do in society? How does religion function? How does it work as a tool, if you want to think of it that way? And atheists, modern atheists from the time of the Enlightenment, roughly the time of the French Revolution onwards, viewed religion as a functional tool. We're going to be looking at some of that, and we're going to look at some of the history, the development, and the thinking of religion, of atheism, which does, and in the United States today, literally is legally protected as a religion. Welcome, Hillslide, Villainous, He Never Returned as a Horse, John 6:29, Prof. Yaffle, Dodzor, Daduza, of course. So, guys, right, so I just want to, we'll pick up more or less where we left off. Some of you will have seen some of these slides. I will, typically, historically, we are told Voltaire, one of the most famous French Enlightenment thinkers, was a deist. And according to various different discussions I've seen, Britannica amongst others, he saw godlessness as weakening the bonds of society. In other words, functionally, they realized that religion has a functional social role. It keeps people together, it binds them around common ideas, common rituals, common beliefs, right? And then he said, if God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent him. We would need something to bind people. well, atheism, yes, does require more faith than theism. However, his actual beliefs, so those were his public beliefs, but his private beliefs were different. As he states here, there is no God. But don't tell that to my servant, lest he murder me at night. They realized that having a God with a moral law, divine moral law, that implied to the believers that there was some kind of punishment in the afterlife for wrongdoing, this actually kept people in check. It actually helped people to mitigate their actions. If there were no consequence for murder, you could murder and it wouldn't mean anything. There would be no divine moral law you would be violating. You would simply be doing something that has absolutely no moral value within society, that there's no absolute moral law that you're violating. There's no absolute moral authority that you're going against. So, in the interest of self interest, and atheism very much does promote the idea of self interest, as we've seen in other shows we've done, he realized they need to fabricate some kind of religion, some kind of God, so that they could maintain some kind of order in society. Oddly enough, remember, he was a serial womanizer. His most well known affair was with a married woman called Emily de Châtelet, but he was a serial womanizer, and he was having an affair with his own niece. So that would be his brother's or sister's child. So he was banging his niece. And of course, he was, if you read his work, he was an avowed racist. The man was, oof, yeah. So,
Yeah,
right now,
lovely guy
yeah,
here, just the pinnacle of free thought, actually. He doesn't
yeah,
care about society's moral standards, he sets his own.
yeah. So obviously, in Christianity, all of these are sinful. All of these are wrong. So this gives him permission to say, so atheism is not just an absence of belief, just a neutral slash pure position, a pure philosophical position. Remember, it is the abrogation, the annulment, the rejection of Christian morals, Christian doctrine, the biblical moral code, right? The moral code of God, right? So once you reject that, once it has no standing, you are then free to develop your own moral code or a different one. So under the atheist doctrine, none of these are sins. Would you agree, Thaddeus?
Yeah, I would say so for sure. And Daduza made a very interesting observation. It all comes down to sex in both atheism and Islam. And I would add in most newly created religions, cults, if you will, the same thing. It seems that it always goes one of two ways. Either it's all about the sexual pleasure of the cult leader, and that's, probably about 80% of the time, or they teach that all sex is forbidden, and that's about the other 20% of cults.
Yeah. Well, interesting. If you look at Anton LaVey, his Satanism, one, he claimed was atheistic. At least he claimed it was. And two, he called his version of Satanism, atheistic Satanism, a carnal religion, right? A carnal religion, a religion based on sex. So yeah, that there's a fair point to that. And here's the thing: if you are a satanic atheist, then you know that your position is the polar opposite of Christian doctrine. You are choosing the opposite. So they're well aware that what they're doing is what we would consider evil, and they are actively, willfully, willingly choosing this position, right? Yeah, they've asked. Oh, so Gospel Truth says he's asked an atheist to comment on this series, and guess what? Crickets. Yeah, I guess they don't want to know about their own history and doctrine of modern atheism and modern atheist thinkers. So,
Yeah, you'd think that people who are all about rationalism, all about evidence, all about uh, peaceful discussions, they would be thrilled to have this discussion. Yet we've gotten a few comments here and there, but they've all been, not really addressing the material. They'll come
right.
in and they'll say, "Oh, that's not my definition of atheism. I believe in a different kind of atheism," or they'll say, "A." Something totally unrelated, like they'll give some attack against Christianity, they'll call us names. No one wants to actually discuss the material, strangely enough.
Yeah, yeah. It's always like, I'm not like that. I'm a different kind of atheist. I'm a Baptist atheist. I'm not like those. I'm not like those Roman Catholic atheists. We're Baptist. We're better. Whatever. I mean, you just get this constant. Yeah. Okay. So Voltaire. Now Voltaire said this quote here: "Prejudices are what fools use for reason." Isn't that just ironic? Isn't that just incredibly ironic? So French atheist Voltaire once said, now here you got a different source calling him an atheist. You got sources calling him a deist, but clearly he was an atheist. He said, in 20 years, Christianity will be no more. My single hand shall destroy the edifice it took 12 apostles to rear. It's interesting for someone who's celebrated as an Enlightenment thinker, an atheist, a man of reason, at the pinnacle of reason, who's just operating according to a principle that's just the absence of belief. It's interesting that he seems to be on a mission, have a cause to destroy Christianity, Christian religion, Christian doctrine, Christian morals. Isn't that a little odd, Thaddeus?
Yeah, and not just him, but every atheist that we talk to. Now, granted, there are people who live their lives as if they're atheists. They don't really think about religion, et cetera, et cetera. But the kind of people who want to talk about atheism, the people who, I don't know, promote it with their YouTube channels devoted to atheism, they sort of seem to be acting in contradiction to their own beliefs. At least if we believe what they say, that, atheism is just a lack of belief and nothing else.
Yeah. So he wrote that in 50 years, no one would remember Christianity. But in the same year that he wrote that, the British Museum paid the Russian government $500,000 for a Bible. Now, in today's dollars, that would probably be like, I don't know, like $50 million, right? So they paid the Russian government $500,000 for a Bible manuscript, while one of Voltaire's books was selling in the London bookstores for just 8 cents. So sadly, he did not do as well as he thought he would. So actually, you know what? There's something that I will mention that might be of value. So let me. Yeah, so it turns out he was not very, very. Okay, this will be interesting. I'm just going to bring something up for a moment.
While that's coming up, Deduza made a humorous comment. Atheism makes as much sense as a snake with mittens.
Yeah. Here's something interesting. Lenin. Notice he says atheism is a natural and inseparable part of Marxism, of the theory and the practice of scientific socialism, scientific atheism. But notice he says we must carry on propaganda in favor of atheism. Religion, okay, so our program necessarily includes the propaganda of atheism, and that our movement is atheistic and positively hostile to all religion. So I have a question. What is the difference between Lenin requiring that atheists spread the propaganda of atheism and atheists who are not Lenin spreading the propaganda of atheism? What is the difference between Lenin forcing atheistic beliefs on education, on culture, preventing Christian doctrine being taught, and atheists who are not Lenin doing exactly that? What is the difference between Marx, Lenin, and Stalin, who taught outright hostility to Christianity, and atheists who are not Lenin, not Marx, not Stalin, doing exactly the same? What are your thoughts on that, Thaddeus?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, of course, there's some differences, obviously, but I don't see any important differences. I don't see any material differences. They're basically doing the same thing.
I mean, they're on the same
saying
page.
they have
They're
nothing
quite
to,
literally
yeah, exactly.
on the same page.
Yeah, like while saying they have nothing to do with one another, and all the deaths that were caused in the socialist revolution in Russia or China, if you prefer. I mean, we're talking about Russia at the moment, but same idea of China. Those have nothing to do with atheism, nothing whatsoever. Atheism is just a mere lack of belief, and you can't propagate a mere lack of belief. You can't enforce that, and it's just a state of mind.
Now, oddly enough, both Marx and Lenin stated the criticism of religion is the beginning of all criticism. Now, atheists say the very same thing. I mean, atheists are all about criticizing religion. In fact, specifically criticizing Christianity. Now, by criticism, you need to read the destruction or elimination. When Marx spoke of criticism, this is like critical race theory. It's the destruction of race relations. It's a toxic practice. Now, atheists spend inordinate time criticizing Christianity. So how are they different to Marx and Lenin and Stalin, since they happen to be all on the same side? Modern atheists spend a lot of time criticizing Christianity. These guys said that they need to criticize Christianity. In fact, it's the foundation of critical thinking, right, the foundation of criticism, they're on the same side. So these guys are on the very same page with Marx, Lenin, Stalin, Hitler, Mao, Pol Pot. Your thoughts on that, Thaddeus? I mean, isn't this fascinating?
Yeah, I mean, it's very bizarre because I thought that atheists didn't have any beliefs, that they had no reason to propagate it. And yet we look at, these figures which are, not atheists, not real atheists. And then we look at the leaders of today's atheist movement and, hey, they're basically doing the same thing other than, forming a government. That's about the only difference.
Right, exactly. Yeah, they just don't happen to have a government. Now, notice this is a book called Religion for Atheists, a non-believer's guide to the uses of religion by a French atheist, a French academic atheist called Alain de Botton. And he says here, okay, let's look at the fun part here. Okay. The premise of this book is that it must be possible to remain a committed atheist and yet find religions useful, interesting, and consoling, and be curious as to the possibilities of importing certain of their ideas and practices into the secular realm. So you can be left cold by the doctrines of the Trinity and yet be interested in the ways in which religions deliver sermons, promote morality, engender a spirit of community, make use of art and architecture, inspire travels, train minds, and encourage gratitude at the beauty of spring. Interesting. Okay. In a world beset by fundamentalists, blah, blah, it must be possible to balance a rejection of religious faith with a selective reverence for religious rituals and concepts. Isn't it interesting that atheists reject this, but yet in every single case, even in these governments that rejected religion, they eventually realized they needed to utilize the church, utilize religion in a functional capacity. So, in fact, atheists being religious, being secular fundamentalists, religious fundamentalists, is the norm, not the exception. Your comments, Thaddeus?
Yeah, this book is fascinating here because it's unusually honest, right? That it's basically saying that atheists need something that resembles religion because this is something that every human being seeks after or something every human being desires. The weird part is that they don't realize the implications of that. If every human being is seeking after religious thought, then maybe there's something behind religion. But they acknowledge the need, but they don't see what the need implies.
Yeah. So notice though, he's got this little thing here, so it's smaller text, but the error of modern atheism has been to overlook how many aspects of the faith remain relevant even after the essential tenets have been dismissed. Once we cease to feel that we must either prostrate ourselves before them or denigrate them, we are free to discover religions as repositories of a myriad ingenious concepts with which we can try to assuage a few of the most persistent and unattended ills of secular life. Oh my golly, they actually need religion. Hence, they've now taken a functional view of religion, not as I said, the substantive view of religion. So therefore, they are religions. They've actually adopted what, in fact, they've fought in court. They went to court, they went to the high court, and they fought to say that their beliefs are a religion because they are functionally a religion, and they won. Atheism in the US is now legally a religion. In fact, they're all registered with the IRS as religious organizations and get a religious tax exemption.
Yeah. Gospel Truth said, new atheists would argue they're somewhat morally superior to the 19th century degenerates. That's bogus. I agree. I mean, well, first of all, what do they mean by morally superior? How do they define morals in their own belief system? But even importing the Christian worldview and using the Christian moral system, they still don't seem to be any better in any way that I can see.
Peter to apologetics. Gaan baie goed, dankie. Ja.
And we'll take a brief break here. Let me take this off the screen because I wanted to highlight these comments. They're not related to today's chat. That's why I'm calling it a brief break. But from Mukit Mahmood, he says, I was a Muslim. Your YouTube channel helped me see Christ as Lord and Savior. You made me realize that Muhammad was a warlord with extreme sexual frustration. That is such awesome news to hear. We are very pleased to hear that The material is having an effect. But beyond that, we're very excited to welcome you to the Christian family.
Yeah. Amen. So yeah, welcome. Good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, and thank you for taking the time to come in and let us know the effect of the material as well, because we know that Muslims are watching it. We know that Muslims are reacting to it. We also know that most never say anything because they're afraid. We only get people posturing and saying how confident they are in the face of the evidence. The people who are actually doubting, they're out there. And sometimes, like Mukita as demonstrated, they do come to Christ. So for those watching who are Christians, continue to share this material with Muslims, continue to talk to Muslims. It may seem like someone is not hearing it, but as long as they're still talking to you, they're hearing the material, and it very well may have an effect. I've heard from Muslims that, for 2 years, they put up a front of how the Christian talking to them, a personal friend talking to them, was having no effect on them. It wasn't doing anything. They pretended like they were super confident in Islam, and then when the conversation would go home, they'd go. When the conversation was over, they'd go home, and then they would bang their head on the wall, metaphorically speaking, because they were just so frustrated at how Islam was not holding up to scrutiny. So keep up with the good work, everyone. All right, we'll go back to the presentation now.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. Someone just brought up Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and I just happened to have Jean-Jacques Rousseau on the very next slide. So he's another one of these famous Enlightenment thinkers, and he says to us, the first man. Now, this is going to sound a little socialist. See if this kind of lines up with Marx, Lenin, Stalin, Engels, and all of those crazy people. The first man who, having fenced in a piece of land, who said, "This is mine," and found people naive enough to believe him, that man was the true founder of civil society. And by this he means bourgeois society, the bourgeoisie. From how many crimes, wars, and murders, from how many horrors and misfortune, might not anyone have saved mankind by pulling up the stakes or filling up the ditch and crying to his fellows, "Beware of listening to this impostor. You are undone if you once forget that the fruits of the earth belong to us all, and the earth itself to nobody. No one, you will own nothing and you will be happy. In fact, if we take all your stuff," I believe the Ten Commandments has a statement that goes, "Thou shalt not steal." But if they steal all your stuff and give it to the government, there will be no more wars, there will be no more crime, there will be no more murders. So yeah, so he promoted the abolition of private property. And I believe there's a guy called Marx who spoke of the abolition of private property. There was the guy who invented modern socialism, right? Henry de Saint-Simon, who recommended the abolition of private property. I wonder, do you think there's an overlap here, Thaddeus?
I don't know. Maybe it's just pure coincidence. Since atheists don't believe in, divine providence or anything, I guess it just must be pure coincidence, because they couldn't have possibly influenced one another. That's not the way atheism works, right?
Yeah, and it just happens to be the exact opposite of Christian doctrine. Isn't that just sheer coincidence? So now he was called the Muse of the Jacobins, right? The Jacobins are the guys who started the French Revolution. The popular image persists of Robespierre quoting passages from Jean-Jacques Rousseau's Social Contract while simultaneously ordering executions. So, yeah, his discourse on the origin and basis of inequality among men and the social contract are cornerstones in modern political and social thought. I would also assume modern atheist thought, but he's revered as one of the great prophets of the Enlightenment. So really, so you will own nothing. The World Economic Forum seems to have something about that as well. Just sheer coincidence, I am sure.
Yeah, there's definitely no relationship between all these things, because they're just all, uh, you know, organic robots, as John just put it. They're just organic robots who want to convert everyone else into organic robots. So since they're just organic robots, they couldn't possibly have any influence from one another. They must be all reaching these conclusions independently just because of some random chemicals causing random thoughts.
Yeah, in fact, don't forget, you have no free will. You have no conscious, right? You have no consciousness. right? Consciousness is an illusion. And it's crazy that you've got people who believe that consciousness is an illusion, right? Who says free will is an illusion, who are very, very interested in converting you to the same belief. That everything is preordained, everything is essentially materialist, just atoms smashing to each other, and everything is determinist. And yet, they're very keen on converting you to their particular view. It's really interesting. It just kind of doesn't make any sense. But let's look at John Adams briefly, founding father, second US president. And he said, now remember, the founding fathers were all atheists, every single one. All of them hated God. None of them were, as the popular story goes. He said, you have rights antecedent to all earthly governments, rights that cannot be repealed or restrained by human laws, rights derived from the great legislator of the universe. Do you think he means here Ronald McDonald? Do you think he means Darkwing Duck? Or do you think he means God here, Thaddeus?
I think he probably means God.
Rights that derive God-given rights. So he says, now hold on, now we've got the socialist atheist view that says exactly the opposite. So basically, if you get rid of God, we atheists can steal your stuff. That's kind of how this game is played. Would I be misspeaking there, Thaddeus?
No, I don't think so. I think that's a pretty accurate picture of what they're doing. Now, that wouldn't be the way they would put it, of course. They wouldn't say that we're stealing your stuff. but yeah, I think that's the reality of what's happening for sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you guys are part of my era, if you grew up in the right time, you'd know this phrase, all your base will belong to us. And they want all your base. It'll belong to them. So a couple of points here about John Adams, and at some point I'll do a discussion on the founding fathers of the US and US civics. He believed in liberty, right? He advocated for the rights of property, right? And he said liberties are not the grants of princes and parliaments. They're the grant of God. The moment the idea is admitted into society that property is not as sacred as the laws of God. Do you think he meant the Christian God here, or was he talking about Buddha, that is?
Yeah, they all act like they're just talking about generic religion, but strangely, the generic God that they portray is always exactly in line with Christian doctrine.
Yeah, just sheer coincidence. So he said, if you admit into society the idea that property is not as sacred as the laws of God and that there is not a force of law and public justice to protect it, anarchy and tyranny commence. Now, all of these atheists decided that your property is not as sacred as the laws of God, that you should not have any property, that you should own nothing, and they'll be very happy about that. And there should not be a force of law and public justice to protect it. And if thou shalt not covet and thou shalt not steal were not commandments of heaven, they must be made inviolable precepts in every society before it can be civilized or made free. I'd say that's a very strongly Christian statement from John Adams, second US president. He said, property must be secured or liberty cannot exist. And he says, government should be for the preservation of peace, virtue, good order, and properties. So the US Constitution stands on Christian principles and stands entirely against socialist atheist principles. And he recognized an enemy to liberty as an enemy to human nature. We have the right to own things. We have the right to property. So your thoughts, Thaddeus?
Yeah. I mean, I would agree with what you say, that John Adams seems to be drawing heavily on Christian theology. He doesn't explicitly state it, but he seems to be drawing heavily on it. And the things that we, as members of the West, hold as sacred, are all derived from Christian doctrine. And this includes the things that atheists, are holding sacred. There's nothing in atheism that says that the government should protect people from other people. And there's nothing in the atheist worldview that inherently in it, I should say, that says that, people have the right to property, or that people have the right to happiness, or that they have the right to freedom. And there's nothing in atheism that would allow for that. They just smuggle it in there, and then they act like, yeah, well, this is exactly what atheism teaches. Well, no, I mean, if we're being real here, and atheism basically leads to determinism. I know that we will look at that a bit more detail later, but it basically leads to determinism. That's the only possibility. So everything's just random chance. There is no morally superior thing, which means there's nothing morally superior about, say, the right to property, or the right to, not having other people steal your property. Nothing in atheism allows for that. The founders of the US were drawing on Christian theology to set up the principles of this country. And now everyone just pretends that they had nothing to do with Christianity.
Yeah, no, we'll do a show on that at some point. I mean, I'll definitely be talking about that. So that's going to be, I mean, as time goes on, I'm busy developing a lot of material. I've got a lot of books. I bought some books recently, so thank you all very much. And Thaddeus bought one for me, in fact, because I wasn't able to buy it. For some reason, I could not buy this book. Outside of the US, I could not. So Thaddeus actually bought it for me. Okay, so we've mentioned this once before, but I'll bring this up. Okay, so this is an article, The Establishment of the Religion of Secular Humanism and its First Amendment Implications. So oddly enough, many atheists use the term materialists, or they use the term humanists or secular humanists. It's another term which means atheist, right? So notice they mentioned the religion of secular humanism because it was founded explicitly in the late 1920s, 1928, explicitly founded as a religion, as a replacement for Christian doctrine, derived from Christian doctrine to replace it. New and improved, with added scientism. So there's a concern in contemporary academia regarding the nature of modern society. Okay, so now you've got someone who says, okay, what he believes to be a pagan society. So now you've got this development, this view of development of a pagan society. In the future, we will discuss that atheistic thinking, the thinking of the Enlightenment, the thinking of the secular humanists, and even the socialists, is derived quite literally from thinking that goes back 2,600 years to Greece and Rome. You're looking at 600 BC, okay? The 4th, 5th, and 6th century BC. You're looking at pagan thinking that has now come back, except they've slapped the label science on it. These are exactly the same thoughts as pagans from 2,600 years ago. Stick on the word science, and now suddenly it's fresh thinking. It's just scientific paganism. So notice the problem is seen by Trueblood and Berman in the deepening secularism that has taken hold of the present cultural matrix, or what is called secular humanism, poses a serious constitutional quandary, because its purpose is to eliminate traditional theism as a significant aspect of reality by forcing traditional theism from the arena of public discourse and American institutional life. So transcendence has been declared inoperative by the major agencies that officially define reality. So try praying in school. You might find that that's not allowed. Not praying in school, which is a very atheist thing to do, is allowed. So this religion, this anti-religion, which doesn't want Christian symbols, but wants their symbols. They don't want to abolish religion. They want to establish their religion. Your thoughts, Thaddeus?
Yeah, it's very interesting that secular humanism, nowadays no one would tend to think of it as a religion, but the founding, they're like, we're founding a new religion. And then they argued in court, as you've pointed out, for that right to be called a religion so that their ideas would have the same standing in the public sphere as religious ideas, i.e. that they can't be excluded from anything that's related to any opportunity where there's religious ideas being expressed. Like, for a trivial example, that when the State House, they put up Christmas decorations, then anyone who wants to put up any other kind of decoration for a different religion has that right in the United States. Well, then the secular humanists are like, see, we're a religion, so we have that right too. We can put up our own propaganda. And Built for Speed commented, anything goes in the concept of atheism. There's no definite moral standard to live by in a systemless system. But strangely enough, the primary argument that atheists make today is that they have a superior moral system than Christianity. Strange stuff.
Based on science. Yeah, Villainous says, that's exactly, Lloyd. There is never a void. Oddly enough, remember, it's not nature adores a vacuum. No, they don't just have a lack of belief. Nature abhors a vacuum. Nature doesn't adore one. We're supposed to, with their word game, with their sophistry, believe that nature adores a vacuum because they just lack a belief, like there's nothing there, just an empty space, right? So, yeah. So the atheist religion has become the religion of the state. Now, notice let's have a look at this. The historical and traditional definition of religion. The religion of the First Amendment is traditional theism, which means Christianity, right? According to the older writings, we'll cover this in the future, the Christianity is technically regarded as the religion of the state, not enforced by the state, but it's considered foundational as part of the culture of the United States. And in particular, he says here, Christianity. So Justice Joseph Story, a leading Unitarian of its time, who served on the Supreme Court from 1811 to 45, has said, probably at the time of the adoption of the Constitution and the First Amendment, the general, if not the universal sentiment in America was that Christianity ought to receive encouragement from the state. So these people have managed to reverse that, to upset that. So far as was not incompatible with the private rights of conscience and the freedom of religious worship. So it was not forbidden, it was endorsed as long as someone was free to choose not to follow it if they so wanted. Now it is actively acted against. An attempt to level all religions and to make it a matter of state policy to hold all in utter indifference would have created universal disapprobation, if not universal indignation. In other words, Christianity was considered supreme. All other religions were secondary or tertiary. So Christianity was considered the operative religion of the state. And he goes on to say, thus the First Amendment was not meant to prevent the establishment of Christianity as a religion, to enforce it as state religion, but to prevent one Christian denomination from dominating others, so that the Southern Baptists did not become the dominant sect of Christianity and therefore subjugating all the other Christian denominations, or the Roman Catholic Church. Or, do you know why the Southern Baptists became the Southern Baptists? Why there was a split? Because those fine, wonderful Southern Baptists decided they liked slavery a whole lot, and they were going to split from the Baptist Church because they were going to defend their right to own slaves. And people who didn't want slavery were going against the Bible and sinning against God. So that's a story for another day. Protestantism. I'm a Protestant too, but man, the more I read about it, the worse it gets. So the framers, you're aware of that, Thaddeus? You know that was historically what happened?
Yes.
So the framers had no intention of eradicating traditional theism. Interesting. We're told the framers had no intention of eradicating traditional theism via the First Amendment, because to them, religion entailed the relationship of man to a supreme being. There you've got the substantive definition of religion, not the functional one. James Madison termed religion as the duty to which we owe our Creator and the manner of discharging it. So therefore, religion was the manner of discharging your duty. And Madison, as well as the majority of the founders, was a theist. Interesting. The framers never intended a complete separation of church and state. In fact, their meaning of church and state is completely different to what is considered separation of church and state today. So, yeah, your thoughts, Thaddeus, before I go on.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the founders over and over again, you find that Christian moral principles were underlying everything they did, and they most certainly wanted to keep society that way. They didn't want to change it. What they meant is that they didn't want to give preference over one particular denomination of Christianity over another. They didn't even mean all religion was on the same standing. They just meant that this wouldn't be a state with the new Church of England, like, where many of them had come from, or at least their ancestors had come from, where the state is in charge of the religious organization. That's what they didn't want. They didn't want the outlaw of religion. They didn't want the removal of religion from the public sphere. And they didn't want other non-Christian religions to be able to put themselves on the same standing. They just didn't want the state to endorse a particular denomination and take control over it.
Yeah, correct. And we'll be discussing all of that in the future. But Lincoln and Queen Victoria justified banning slavery using the Bible. Both were church-going Christians, heavily influenced by the Christian. Yeah. Although, man, Lincoln, there's a question around Lincoln. I must admit there are some questions around Lincoln. This is not the time for that, but even Lincoln, there's some very uncomfortable questions around Lincoln. There's good things and there's some bad things. So some really bad things around Lincoln as well. Okay, superstition. So A superstition is a notion maintained despite evidence to the contrary. Right? Something that is very important to note. A belief that is not based on human reason or scientific knowledge, and this is how they describe Christian doctrine, Christian beliefs. But we will see that a lot of these ideas can be easily attributed to atheist thinking because it's not derived on the logos, it's based on sophistry. Pardon me. Now, so let's ignore that slide. So Churchill, Madison, and Lincoln. Socialism is the philosophy of failure, of ignorance, and of envy. Okay, that is Churchill. Socialism is the equal sharing of miseries. And I think I lived within the former Soviet Union, the former communist bloc. And yeah, that much people hate it. Okay, now let's have a look at what we have here from James Madison. The US Constitution is intended to provide equal protection to unequal abilities. This is not equality, right? Property is the fruit of labor. Property is desirable. It is a positive good in the world. So this is something that these founders believed in, right? They believed, so that they warned us about socialism. Now, again, we've discussed Marx, right? So look at these poems. Now, few people realize, okay, worlds I would destroy forever, since I can create no world, right? I would destroy worlds forever. I would destroy whole planets. Heaven I have forfeited. I know it full well. My soul, once true to God, is chosen for hell. I plunge without fail my blood-black sword into your soul. That God neither wants nor wists, it leaps to the brain from hell's black mists. So his blood-black sword leaps to the brain from hell's black mists. With Satan I have struck my deal. He chalks the signs, beats time for me. I play the death march. Oh, sorry. Okay, is that fixed? My apologies if the volume keeps changing. My apologies about that. Hopefully that fixed it. Let me know. Otherwise, I'll change my audio settings. Right. Now, notice this is Karl Marx. Marx, in fact, there are other translations of this one. Let's have a look at this other one. Look now, my blood dog sword shall stab within thy soul. God neither knows nor honors art. The hellish vapors rise and fill the brain till I go mad and my heart is utterly changed. See the sword, the prince of darkness sold it to me. So Marx earned this. This is a different translation of the same poem. He beats the time and gives the signs even more boldly. I play the dance of death. This translation comes from a Marxist website. So they've kind of maybe changed it a little bit to make it a little bit more acceptable and palatable. This one is supposedly a more accurate translation, but Marx claims to have sold his soul to the devil for a sword of destruction to bring destruction to the world. That's the point of Marxist socialism. Your thoughts, that is, before I go on?
Yeah, I mean, if we didn't know who this was from, we might think it was like from Aleister Crowley or something, someone who's into the occult and trying to conjure up demons and spirits and stuff. And nope, it's Karl Marx, just that harmless founder of communism. Nothing to see here. Let's move on.
Yeah, exactly. Now notice he fell under the tutelage of an atheist professor of theology. So he went to university and the professor of theology was an atheist. Now, what kind of slant do you think the atheists had on religion? Probably a very negative, extremely hostile slant in religion. So he fell under the influence of a guy called Bruno Bauer, an atheist professor of theology who radicalized Marx. So Marx was radicalized by an atheist professor. And Marx wrote of suicide, and his two daughters killed themselves in suicide pacts. Now, Marx, if you read his writings, he wrote a satanic play. He wrote satanic poetry. And in fact, he wrote of suicides. He wrote of suicide pacts. His two daughters killed themselves in suicide pacts with their husbands. So his daughter killed herself and her husband killed himself, right? And the second one killed herself, but the husband failed to go through with the suicide pact. So two of his children, at least, murdered themselves in suicide pacts. Marx had this kind of influence. And these are the things he wrote about. These are the kinds of things he celebrated. So Marx, there was something satanic going on with Marx. There's a lot of discussion in his life with people saying there was something satanic about him.
Yeah, I mean, this is just, shocking information. This is not the kind of thing that we ever hear about Marx. We just hear that, like, maybe the worst thing we might hear is that he was unrealistic or something along those lines, that he was, an idealist and disconnected from reality. That might be the worst thing you'd hear about him. You never hear about any of his, satanic desires, his attempts at suicide, is coercing other people into suicide. No, never hear any of that.
Yeah, weird how they leave all the good bits out. Now, Gramsci, let me see if I want to be discussing this because I know we've discussed some of this before. So I just want to give you guys a fresh perspective here. Maybe we can run through this. Um, so Antonio Gramsci, okay, cultural Marxist architect, and he says socialism is the religion that must overwhelm Christianity. And he means atheist socialism. Socialism will triumph by capturing the culture by infiltration of schools, universities, churches, and the media, by transforming the consciousness of society. This is something you need to bury. These people are deadly serious, and they have achieved exactly this. Now, very often people speak about the Frankfurt Society, the long march through the institutions. This was literally their goal. This is not a conspiracy theory. But prior to renaming themselves to the Frankfurt Society, they were called the Club of Marx or the Marxist Club, which should tell you something. So these people were Marxists. They realized they needed to rename themselves to make themselves more acceptable, and they moved to New York or California, as I believe. So, yeah. Okay, I'll skip a little bit of this, but notice socialist Saul Alinsky describes his modus operandi and rules for radicals. He's well known. He was someone that Hillary Clinton looked up to. And in his book, Rules for Radicals, Alinsky personally acknowledges Lucifer as the very first radical. He says, what follows is for those who want to change the world from what it is to what they believe it should be. Right? He says, The Prince was written by Machiavelli for the haves on how to hold power. Rules for Radicals is written for the have-nots on how to take it away. So this is how to create their utopia. And in this case, he acknowledges Lucifer as the first radical who fought against God and managed to establish his own kingdom. So now you've got satanic aims. These people have literally satanic aims, which is the destruction of the existing order. In fact, Marx wrote constantly and would speak constantly of everything that exists must be destroyed. This was Marx's aim.
Yeah, amazing stuff here that, these socialists often draw on Satan as a popular, as a role model, if you will, that he's someone that they're looking up to, whether they say he really existed or not. They're looking at, the story and saying, this is the story that we want to emulate. We want to rebel against God or the conception of God and replace it with a system where we're in control. We establish our own kingdom, as you put it. We are our own gods.
Yeah, agreed. So now the Confession of Communist Faith, right? The Communist Manifesto. So give a little thought to the Communist Confession of Faith. I think we would do best to abandon the catechetical form and call the thing the Communist Manifesto. So you may have heard some of this, so I won't spend too much time. Catechetical, obviously, is a Catholic term. It means religious instruction or religious teaching, right? And it's given in preparation for baptism or confirmation. So the Communist Manifesto was first called the Communist Confession of Faith. There is a very strong correlation between communism, socialism, and Islam Sharia, correct? And yeah, you'd be surprised. The links to Islam are strong. Just the methodology, the structure. So let's continue. Now, again, we've seen some of this. Lenin, Religion, his book, Religion, 1905. Our program necessarily includes the propaganda of atheism. We must carry on propaganda in favor of atheism. Now, when atheists repeat Marxist propaganda, they are Marxists, right? What's the difference between a monkey flinging poo and a human flinging poo? Not a whole lot. You're still flinging poo, right, if you want to think of it that way. So when atheists repeat Marxist propaganda, when atheists talk about these things, they are literally repeating Marx. Now, are we supposed to say, you're the good guys, except you're repeating Marx because you agree with Marx on this? Maybe you're the baddies. Your thoughts, that is.
Yeah, you put it well when you said, what's the difference? Not much, really. I mean, if you're doing the same thing, does it really matter what you're claiming it is? I don't think it does. They definitely seem to be on the same side.
Right, yeah. So, okay, now, of course, we've mentioned this guy, B.F. Skinner. He was one of the American Humanist Association's Humanist of the Year, Atheist of the Year awards. And he said, we can no longer afford freedom. We must design our culture to shape the behavior needed. Now, the socialists wanted to design the culture, to shape it. Even Saul Alinsky said, we must design the culture, we must shape it to create the culture we want, the world we want. Clearly, they have an idea. They're not just lacking belief. These guys clearly want to build a utopian world. And he says we can no longer afford freedom. He also recommended the abolition of the family unit. Marx has 10 commandments of socialism in the Communist Manifesto. Number 2 or number 3 is the abolition of the family unit. Marx wanted the abolition of the family. Only Black Lives Matter, the organization called OBLM, one of their aims was the abolition of the family unit because it's a bourgeoisie construct and they must abolish everything of the bourgeoisie. So now what you have is, he says, free will and moral autonomy. So he says that the entrenched belief in free will and the moral autonomy of the individual hinders the prospect of using science to modify behavior for the purposes of building a happier and better organized society. So he says free will and moral autonomy gets in the way of science. So the corollary of that is that science doesn't like free will and doesn't like moral autonomy. It likes to tell you what to do. It is therefore totalitarian. So we need to understand that this means the destruction of individuality, and it means the destruction of your free will. You will own nothing because we've told you, and you will like it. You will eat this, you will wear this, you will live in the pod, you will eat the bugs. Thaddeus.
Yeah, they're laying it all out there. If we have free will, then the atheist worldview doesn't make any sense. We all think we have free will, but we're all wrong because we know that atheism is true. I think that's the way the argument goes.
Yeah. And free will he saw as a miraculous event and believed science was opposed to any kind of miracles. Therefore, you don't have free will. So, yeah, keep that in mind. And notice in the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx writes, abolition of the family, even the most radical, flare up at this infamous proposal of the communists. On what foundation is the present family, the bourgeois family, based? On capital and private gain. In its completely developed form, this family exists only among the bourgeoisie. And unfortunately, they can't have that, so they must destroy the family. They have to remember everything that exists must be destroyed. This was Marx's constant phrase. So he wanted to tear down the existing order. And this is exactly what they're trying to do, right? Did your kid say he wanted to be a pirate when he was 5? Okay, let's schedule peg leg surgery and eye removal for tomorrow. Right? Because he wants to be a pirate. Don't stop him, you bigot. We have just the same peg leg. It's going to be $20,000 for the surgery and $10,000 a year for maintenance. Yeah, that is.
Yeah, I think I need to crop that part out. Sure, because that was hilarious.
Yeah.
But I mean, really, it's not that different, right? You can't tell a child that they are the gender they are. I mean, that's just wrong nowadays. So you can't tell a child that he's not a pirate either.
Yeah. Exactly. It's stupid. I mean, this is where we've come to. This is reason. This is rationality. This is atheist reason. This is the nonsense, the absolute irrationality that atheism has led us to. The belief that men can have babies. This is atheist rationality at work. Atheists need to own this. Okay? So, yeah. So notice he writes here, this bourgeois claptrap about the family and education, about the hallowed co-relation of parent and child becomes all the more disgusting the more by the action of modern industry. All family ties among the proletarians are torn apart, their children transformed into articles of commerce and instruments of labor. The bourgeois sees in his wife a mere instrument of production. And Marx is the good guy, apparently. So, yeah. So this is the kind of view that Marx had of society and of the world. So, okay, I'm going to skip this. And notice we've got here free will. This is an interesting article called The Atheist's Bluff. It's fairly long. It's not like amazing, but it does raise some very, very interesting questions. But notice he says here, many leading atheists do not believe in free will, but hope we will still allow them to talk as if moral responsibility is real. If you have no free will, if everything is deterministic, and don't forget, in Islam, there is no free will. In Orthodox Islam, there is zero free will. Everything is deterministic. Everything is determined by Allah. You have no free will. Allah made you do it. Right or wrong, Allah made you do it. So therefore, you cannot be responsible. You cannot be guilty. You cannot have any blame if it was determined from the beginning of time. It was your fate, unstoppable to do this. Now, oddly, but yet they want to talk as if moral responsibility is real. So this is a huge contradiction in their argument, and ignore the implications for how we view ourselves. Now, let's see what Professor Richard Dawkins says. I have a materialist view of the world. I think that things are determined in a rational way by antecedent events, atoms knocking together. And that commits me to the view that when I think I have free will, when I think I'm exercising free choice, I am deluding myself. My brain states are determined by physical events.
Even that phrase, I am deluding myself, implies free
Who's the
will.
I?
Yeah. Well, I mean, how can you delude yourself? That means you're tricking yourself, but you have no control, right? There is no self, really. It's
Yeah.
just a collection of prior events all leading up to this point, and he has no control over that. This is one of the classic debates in philosophy, because if materialism is true, if the scientific principles that are the foundation of a large portion of our beliefs are true, then there doesn't seem to be any possibility of free will. Yet everything we do, everything about the way we think, everything about even people arguing there is no free will, all implies there's free will. So everyone, literally everyone, thinks they have free will, even if they are like Dawkins and say, no, I've just deluded myself. I don't really have free will. Now I'm going to go write a book about how I don't have free will. So it's a major problem, unless, of course, you allow for God. Then there's no problem whatsoever. I would say that free will is an excellent argument for God, in fact.
Yeah. There's two things I will mention with regards to this that are very... So, welcome to Atheist Science. I'm going to show you a science called phrenology. You guys may have heard of this before, right? Do you guys remember this? This phrenology, the bumps in your head say a lot, apparently, about who you are. See, the physical contours of your skull, the physical bumps on your skull, basically determine, and you can read the bumps on the skull, and that tells you what kind of person you are. This was called phrenology, okay? And people would do all sorts of fun things with this. So let me take this and go to Google, because Google is usually a better search engine for this particular thing. Because there's a couple of fascinating devices you might want to look at, but you could actually find machines to measure your head. Okay, see here, people would measure your head and they would then figure things out. See, this was a whole science back in the day. It became an entire fad because they believed that phrenology machine. Let's see if I can find. There's one that's a really fascinating photograph. This machine, yeah, the pseudoscientific phrenology machine. So here's someone actually sitting in it, and there's actually photographs. And there we go. Here you can see this kind of thing. Fascinating stuff. So they believe that because atoms and molecules and nervous signals and chemicals interacting in your brain caused thinking. Thinking is not something that your soul does, for instance. There's no consciousness that does this. The consciousness is a result of molecules and chemical interactions, things just smacking together. Materialists. Remember, these are materialists. Atheists have chosen materialism. Therefore, the bumps in your head, you can use that to trace from physical aspects. They can trace who you are. This was quack science. I mean, this is 100% quack science, but this came out of this stupid Enlightenment thinking. Okay, this is quack science that was invented strictly by these atheists. Now, here's another thing. Take someone with a seizure, an epileptic seizure. Now, they claim that atoms, chemicals, things smacking together, these things caused thinking, right? Causes consciousness. So here's the thing. Someone has an epileptic seizure. Sure, it affects their muscles. It affects their movements. Correct, Thaddeus? Mm-hmm. They move uncontrollably because there's an overwhelming stimulus of these nerves and chemicals in the brain causing the body to respond, so that an electrical, chemical, physical interaction in the brain causes an external reaction in the human. Here's a question. So one scientist, now this is going to be a fascinating discussion for another day, but one neuroscientist recently, and he disproved all this crap, and he said, look, if thinking, everything we think, is merely the result of material interaction, atoms knocking together or chemicals hitting into each other, sloshing around in a bucket, whatever, great. So you see someone, spastically moving because of having an epileptic seizure. He says, how come we don't have calculus seizures? How come we don't have cooking seizures? How come we don't have billiards seizures? How come we don't have philosophical seizures? How come we don't have, I don't know, cha-cha dance seizures? Because if it's just random that the thoughts are merely mechanical interactions in the brain, they should produce anything. But why do they only produce paralysis in the body, spastic actions in the body? Why don't they, if these things just, if thinking, the consciousness is purely the result of materialism, of mechanical interaction, why don't you get intellectual seizures? And that is a really good question. That is.
Yeah, I mean, that is a really good question. Science in general has this problem where, because you assume a materialist worldview, you think that all of the smaller parts should add up to the bigger part, that the bigger thing, whatever it would be, in this case consciousness, is merely the sum of all the inputs, all the smaller things. And that doesn't seem to work in practice. They have to rely on science of the gaps, if you will, and say, well, we don't know how it works now, but we will eventually, as long as we study enough and we find it out. But all the evidence suggests the opposite is actually true, that there is, when you go up to a higher level, it is more than just all of the smaller things added together. It isn't just random molecules beating together to cause you to have consciousness, if you will.
Yeah.
I do
It
have
is
several.
interesting. Scientific experiments have disproven that idea over and over. It's been done. Sorry, you're going? Sorry, that is.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, that's been disproven. I'll discuss it another time. I've got some interesting material on that. But notice within this short article called The Atheist Bluff, atheists believe you can deny the existence of God and all the consequences are immediately positive. If God says, thou shalt not kill, if atheists deny God and there's no moral lawgiver, no transcendent authoritative figure that provides this law and provides punishment, let's say, there are no consequences, and that law is now defunct. So are you free to kill? Stalin thought so, for instance, right? Now, there are implications of atheism, okay? In particular, free will, which is denied by leading atheists like Richard Dawkins. Now, if there's no free will, then there is no moral accountability. Moral accountability assumes that we choose our actions. If we don't choose our actions, what does this do for our ideas about justice and right and wrong? Did you choose to rape someone? Did you choose to steal? If you had no choice, then can you be punished for it? Well, look at California. So, yeah. Anything before I go on, that is?
Yeah, before you go on, did have a few comments that I wanted to read from the chat. But first, one thing I wanted to say is that phrenology, of course, is viewed as the prime example of pseudoscience today.
Atheistic, rational, quack science. Thank you.
But I was going to say, as you pointed out, at the time, it was just science, right? Actually, the conclusions make perfect sense. That if there's just physical properties of the brain that cause you to think differently, cause you to have different behaviors, have different personality, whatever, you should be able to measure that, right? I mean, we've now given up the idea that you can measure it physically by measuring differences in the skull, which is what it was based on. But the principle makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So it was really actually just science at the time. It wasn't really pseudoscience when it was being practiced.
Yeah. Now we know. I mean, so atheism has gone down the rabbit hole of utter stupidity. They just want to hide it away under the rug. That's all they're trying to do. So the like button. Thanks, guys. Yeah. So remember to
it wants to evolve. It has desire, and because everything's just random molecules. So now the like button has the same principle, same characteristics of a human being. It wants to evolve. It just needs some heat. So go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Peter, to Apologetics, pointed out that even Adam has no free will in Islam. He was forced to sin by Allah. And that's what most people don't realize, including most Muslims, is that, like atheism, Islam is actually 100% deterministic. I mean, at least if we take the Quran seriously. It asserts over and over again that Allah controls everything, that he causes people to obey and he causes people to disobey. And the believer, the Muslim, has no say in that whatsoever. Very interesting stuff, the correlations between atheism and Islam. And like Islam, just like atheism, just about all Muslims deny that principle, even though it's exactly what their belief system teaches. Nicholas said that life would be meaningless without free will. Exactly. Free will gives it meaning. Otherwise, we're just machines with, no control over anything that we do. And one more, going back earlier, obviously, but it was too humorous not to bring up. When my son was 5 years old, he would have happily transitioned to being a T-Rex.
Exactly. I mean, this is stupid. This is entirely stupid. How is this rational or scientific? But thanks, atheists. So, okay, so I'm going to jump over a bunch of slides. So I just wanted to show you guys this one slide. This is Lenin, who said the scientific concept of dictatorship. Now we had scientific socialism, scientific atheism. Don't forget, those are socialist terms invented by Marx and Lenin, scientific atheism. Now we have scientific dictatorship. And scientific dictatorship means nothing else but this: power without limit, resting directly upon force, restrained by no laws, absolutely unrestricted by rules. That is totalitarianism. Understand? Totalitarianism is a modern concept based on atheistic doctrine. There is no ultimate moral lawgiver. There are no consequences. You can do as you like because people don't matter. They're just material. They're just meaningless material. People have no rights. There are no human rights. There is nothing fundamental. So yeah, that is your thoughts on that.
Yeah, just the same thing over and over again. We see atheists saying one thing and acting a different way.
Peter Apologetics hit the like button with a toothpick. Dude, that's so yeah, with the toothpick. And restricted by rules, yeah. Okay, so within studies, atheists love to talk about this, but democracies commit less genocide or democide than other regimes. So this is something to discuss for another time, another day. But okay, so I'm going to skip this. I'm going to move forward now to a couple of other slides because I don't want to go through all of that. That's a picture of the day that I get from my wallpaper. It changes every 24 hours. I don't have control over what it shows. Okay, so now let me go here to the next. I want to speak briefly about this humanist deception. Right? So the humanist deception says as follows. Now, this is from the most popular atheist magazine in the United States. And of course, atheists are going to say, I'm not one of those atheists. Those are not real atheists. This is called free inquiry because they're all free thinkers. And the editorial, Is Humanism a Religion? Does it even matter? By Tom Flynn. Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. And Tom tells us, central to conservative attacks on secular humanism is the notion that humanism is a religion of man whose goal is to overturn Christian values among the young and replace them with the values of a human-centered religion. This argument carries substantial force in the popular mind, which already considers humanism a religion. This is before we even get into the fact that they literally do call themselves a religion over and over. Right? So many Christians view humanists as competitors in the spiritual marketplace, vying for souls in opposition to the true faith. Humanism remains vulnerable to this type of attack because of its own history. Humanist Manifesto 1, the first manifesto of humanism, the Atheist Manifesto, was virtually a Unitarian document, and liberal religionists were prominent among the signers of Humanist Manifesto 2. At the same time, many humanists called themselves religious, while some adherents of liberal religion consider their faith humanistic. So in other words, he's not trying to lay it on thick here, but he's saying that we have called ourselves a religion for decades at this point, for more than half a century. We've been calling ourselves a religion. Maybe we need to rethink this, people, right? And finally, humanist writers often fail to establish firm demarcations between humanism and religion. Now, I will mention Nuria Khan. Her name is the light of Yah, the light of Yahweh, which is very fascinating. She doesn't believe in Yahweh, but anyway, and Allah doesn't believe in Yahweh, and Muslims don't believe in Yahweh. They happen to say anything they don't like about Yahweh, but it's odd that the name Yahweh occurs over and over within their names. Notice he says, he speaks of this guy, Fred Edwards, okay, executive director of the American Humanist Association, reflected on the confusion in a recent letter to Phyllis Schlafly, okay? So he notices here, Edwards' game attempt to broaden the discussion by calling humanism a religion or philosophy fails to mark his concession to Schlafly's main point, that humanism is a religion. He conceded. Because quite literally, the founders of secular humanism over and over for decades called it religion. I've got a very detailed discussion, a set of slides on that already. He admits humanists who see humanism as their religion would not contest Schlafly's claim. Right? So now he tells us there are important reasons to prevent secular humanism as a thrust clearly distinct from phenomenon we might call religious. One is linguistic, other, even more compelling reasons are practical. Okay? So now what he says here, like good Abduls, humanists have been trying to redefine terms to weasel the way out of the mess they put themselves in. There remain sound, practical reasons not to call humanism a religion, he writes. It is advantageous for fundamentalists to present humanism as a competing faith that, though diametrically opposed to their own, is nonetheless of the same order. If humanism is perceived as a religion, thoughtful skeptics who reject religion may reject humanism too, depriving the movement of new viewpoints and enthusiasm. Finally, and most ominously, a humanism that is religious is subject to the same constitutional curbs by which humanists themselves have striven to restrict conventional religion. If people realize we are religion, they can apply the same laws to us that we have used to attack conventional religion. If humanism is a church, then it must be kept separate from the state. This is fundamental legal insight underlying the Hatch Amendment. If we can persuade the public, atheistic propaganda, if atheists can persuade the public that atheism is a philosophy, not a religion, we reduce the possibility that the new generation of conservative jurists can use against us the First Amendment protections on which we depend. That is.
Yeah, I mean, I just love this article. He lays it all out there. The only thing he doesn't say explicitly is we've always called ourselves a religion, but you know, he's like, we can't be a religion because then we'll be subject to the law. But we are a religion because we need the protection of the First Amendment. We got to somehow walk the line and use the First Amendment to our advantage, but not be held back by it. And also, you know, saying that people have noticed that we behave just like a religion and they think of us as a religion, but we don't want to be a religion because some people don't like religion and we want to appeal to them.
Yeah, exactly. So understand, they know their religion, they are religion, and they deliberately, from this point on, 1985 onwards, they embarked on a program to deliberately change their public image into, we're not a religion, we're just a lack of belief. That is a fairly new idea. That was a deliberate propaganda strategy because they've always been a religion. For decades, they've been telling people, we are the new religion, the new religion, the new religion. Hey guys, in the chat, apparently there's a really fantastic video on Islam that you guys are discussing. I'm pretty sure I'm not having a talk about Islam, so if you guys can let me know where I can find this interesting video on Islam that's being discussed at length in the chat, that'll be great, because I see Muhammad being mentioned more than any actual content that I'm discussing. So, yeah. Communism and atheism, same roots. When the era of communist rule began in Russia in 1917, religion was seen as a hindrance to a thriving socialist society. Modern atheists believe that religion is a hindrance to modern scientific society. Of course, socialism is a scientific socialism, right? So therefore, it's either way, it's just, yeah, villainous, that would be true. So now, Karl Marx, co-author of the Communist Manifesto, wrote, communism begins where atheism begins. Communism is atheism. Atheism is communism. This is just one variation of this atheistic doctrine, socialist atheism. And notice Karl Marx says, my object in life is to dethrone God and destroy capitalism. Your thoughts, Thaddeus, before I go on?
Yeah, I mean, of course, Karl Marx doesn't really know much of anything about communism or atheism, right? But he does seem to think that it's absolutely essential for communism to have atheism. And then the atheists come in today and they tell us atheism has nothing to do with communism. Communism is completely different. You can have communism and religion. You can have communism and atheism. You can have non-communism and atheism. You can have non-communism and religion. And, Marx, I guess he doesn't really know what he's talking about.
Yeah, no. So, okay, so I'm going to skip ahead now again. I'm not going to do every slide in this. I'm going to skip ahead now a little bit to the next. We'll just cancel that and just jump forward a couple of slides. Right, so just to refresh you guys on this, there were two major court cases in the United States. This one is an older one, and it states United States Courts of Appeals for the DC Circuit. All right. And let's look at some of the filings as part of this. Right? It is therefore, okay, the government must treat atheism as favorably as theistic religion. So it must be viewed on the same level as other religions, right? There cannot be favoritism between religions. What is true of atheism is equally true of humanism. So the government, the courts, have decided that atheism and humanism are effectively the same thing. They're both religions, and they both compete with Christianity, and they must be given equal protection under the law as religions. And they speak here of recognizing secular humanism as a religion for First Amendment purposes. And non-theistic ethical society qualified for tax exemption as a church. That's the American Humanist Association, because you can see here the American Humanist Association. Qualify a non-theistic ethical society. And don't forget, this ethical society has also been founded as a religion. Okay, that's another guy called Adler. They qualified for tax exemption as a church, the American Humanist Association, treating humanism as a religion for Establishment Clause and Equal Protection Clause, and that the prison department violated the Establishment and Equal Protection Clause by refusing to recognize humanism and authorize humanist study group meetings on the same terms as theistic faiths. So the prison didn't allow to have, they wanted religious groups, and these humanists wanted to have their religious meetings as well. And the prison didn't allow it, and this was against the law. And they recognized that humanism is a religion for Establishment Clause and Equal Protection Clause purposes. And the Supreme Court has held in a previous case that secular humanism is a religion. The do it's not just tax rebates. They've argued for decades. When you say tax rebates, you can say, oh, they just did it for those reasons and none other. That is a cop-out. You're actually giving them ammunition to fool people with. This wasn't about the tax rebates. It's like saying, oh, Muhammad just did it because he would make some extra money, or you wouldn't have to go to war or something, whatever. It's just, no, it's not about tax rebates. Yes, they get tax rebates. They are registered as religions. If they can just point at, well, it's just for tax rebate purposes, then they can make you ignore everything else attached to that. It's like, no, it's just a lack of belief, and you'll ignore everything else attached to that. That is simply a misdirection. Don't fall for it. Please don't fall for the propaganda or promote it yourself.
Yeah, when we looked at and I don't think we've done that yet on my channel, to be clear, but and maybe in the next video, when we look at the foundation of secular humanism, we see in their founding documents that they're talking about being a replacement religion, and they specifically wanted a religious status so that when First Amendment issues come up, like, for example, teaching a religion in school, they can say, well, if you're going to say anything about Christianity, then you got to say something about us too.
And then it backfired on them, and then they had to change that. You there, Thaddeus? Looks like
Yes.
you dropped off from. Okay. Yeah, and then that backfired on them. So now notice that they're talking literally out of both sides of their mouth. Quite literally, atheists, this is atheist takia, as someone mentioned earlier. They quite literally play both sides of the fence. They are complete hypocrites. They will do both. They will play lawfare on the one side because they're religious, and they'll play, well, we're not a religion. We don't believe in religion. We have a lack of belief. These atheists, and I mean, look, atheists are going to go, well, they're not real atheists. Look, they're atheists. They're part of your church. Go sort them out. They're radical atheists. Do something about it. But, so yeah, it's like they jihadis. They're not real Muslims. Sure, but go fix it. But yeah, That's just their way to get out of that. Now, secular humanism is religion. John Dewey, the father of American education, and this guy corrupted the US education system. This is worth diving into at some point. He described humanism as a common faith, the common faith of all mankind. You see, remember, atheists love to tell you that atheism is the default position. Well, he said, well, this is the common faith of mankind. It is the default position. We all have this common faith. Julian Huxley called it religion without revelation. And the first Humanist Manifesto spoke openly of humanism as a religion. I've showed this before. Humanism is entirely a religion. They speak of it as religious humanism openly in the Humanist Manifesto 1 and 2. And then when they wrote Humanist Manifesto 3, they were like, oh, yeah, we got to fix this because we're no longer a religion. Don't tell anyone that. We're still registered as one. We went to court to legally fight to be regarded as one, but don't tell anyone that. So many humanists can be cited who have acknowledged that humanism is a religion. We'll talk about that at some point. Claiming that humanism was the new religion was trendy for at least 100 years, perhaps beginning in 1875 with the publication of The Religion of Humanity. Okay? And in the 1950s, they sought and obtained tax-exempt status as religious organizations. Now, here's the thing. If they're not religious organizations, why would they want this? Right? Why would they go to court to defend their right, to promote themselves, to proselytize? The Supreme Court of the United States spoke in 1961 of secular humanism as a religion. It was a struggle to get atheism accepted as a religion, but it happened. From 1962 to 1980, this was not controversial. Atheism was a religious position until they decided it was bad PR. That is?
Yeah, and I'll just point out, since it may not be obvious to those who are not from the United States or at least not familiar with U.S. tax law, you don't have to be a religious organization to be a nonprofit. You can have a nonprofit get the same tax status without being a religious organization. So when you filed it specifically as a religious organization, then you have other motives besides tax benefits.
Yeah, yeah. So secular humanism. So then Christians obviously started to take them to task on this, and I think this is something we definitely need to do. But the ACLU got involved, and the secular humanists completely reversed their strategy, and now they claim that humanism is not at all religious, but scientific, just like socialism is scientific, right? However, secular humanists and the courts have admitted and set precedent that humanism is a religion, and this is it. And we've seen Julian Huxley, for instance, the coming new religion of humanism. He wrote that in The Humanist, a journal, back in 1962. A humanist-based religion must redefine divinity. Notice, like Islam, like Muslims, they're very, very interested in redefining terms, redefining words, creating new definition. So we will see the birth of a new religion based on what I've called evolutionary humanism. The beliefs of this religion of evolutionary humanism are not based on revelation. And this humanist religion will have the task of redefining good and evil in terms of fulfillment and of desirable or undesirable. That's Sharia law. That's Islam to a T. What is legal and what is illegal. It's just, and a humanist religion, right, will, like ancient Greek, stress excellent and blah, 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 and it'll make psychological integration. So a lot of the psychological movements you've seen over the last 30 years are purely based on this materialist atheist view. This is their form of religion for the masses, and it's the equivalent of the state of salvation in Christian terminology. So their therapy is the equivalent of Christian salvation. Oh, that is.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it there when you said that atheist moral principles and Muslim moral principles through the Sharia are one and the same, and that's because they're both human beings trying to create laws to govern themselves. Muslims claim that it has something to do with Allah, but we know from our many shows on Sharia that it's not really the case, that anything can be discarded. You just say that whatever is in the Quran, we don't need to worry about that. The words are there, but they have a different meaning than they appear to have. And even Muhammad's words, those can be overridden. It's really only what the consensus of scholars say, i.e., human beings creating laws for human beings.
Yeah. So I'll do a few more slides. I just want to talk about atheism in education. I know we did this on my channel together, but it might be good to just finish this on your channel. Mm-hmm. And so let's continue here. So John Dewey, we need to speak about this John Dewey guy, this guy here on the right. And this is from the book, The Messianic Character of American Education, because these atheists do see themselves as messianic. It is a religion of self, quite literally, they state that. Dewey's view on philosophy and education flowed from his naturalistic, his materialist, atheist worldview. He replaced Christianity with a religion of his own, secular humanism, which he described as follows in a document, a book he called A Common Faith. And he said, here are all the elements for a religious faith, right? And he says, what remains for us is to make this faith explicit and militant. Militant atheists, militant atheism. They need to make this faith explicit. It needs to be brought into the world through proselytization, and it needs to be made militant. He rejected God and God's word essential to education and replaced them with secular humanism. The man who founded the American educational system decided to inject his humanist views into American education, to turn out a bunch of humanists, atheist humanists. Democracy was Dewey's God, and the state school his church. In fact, there is something called the religion of democracy. There's actually another atheist that wrote The Religion of Democracy. So, yeah. And he says the child becomes the sun about which the appliances of education revolve. He's the center about which they are organized. So, in other words, they need to indoctrinate your kids. And yeah. So, your thoughts, Thaddeus, before I go on?
Yeah, I mean, it's really enlightening seeing this said explicitly by members of the movement, because when we look at the education system in America as Christians, we often say that it seems like the education system is anti-Christian, that it intends to separate children from the Christian faith of their parents. But when we say stuff like that, people will, say that we're crazy or something. So it's very good to see that the founders of the movement were quite explicit, and that's exactly what they were trying to do. And it seems that they're largely been successful.
Yeah, exactly so. Now, notice public education before the 1830s, and a guy called Horace Mann, who was one of these guys who also got his claws into American education. No schools in the US were state supported or state controlled. They were local parent-teacher enterprises supported without taxes, and they took care of all kids. The families paid for the teacher. They were all remarkably high in standard. You actually had a higher literacy rate back then. And they were all Christian schools. All of them were Christian schools. Now, these guys from Mann onwards, they wanted a school that wasn't about education, okay? They wanted to promote democracy and equality. This goes back to the 1800s, not in a legal or civic sense, but in terms of the engineering of a socialized citizenry, in terms of socialism. Public education became the means of creating a social order of the educator's design. This was the new social order. Such men saw themselves in the school in messianic terms. These guys, man, if you start to see what they actually were saying, it is crazy. Like, for instance, this is Horace Mann. Okay. He tells us, no one did more than he to establish in the minds of the American people the conception that education should be universal, non-sectarian, not religious, free, and that its aim should be social efficiency, civic virtue, and character rather than mere learning or the advancement of sectarian ends. Now, if we go to this old deluder Satan Act of 1647, Massachusetts, for instance, as I said, all schools prior to a certain period were all Christian. They passed the old deluder Satan Act in 1647, laying the basis for public schools in America. The Puritans valued literacy highly. They believed that individuals must be able to read and interpret the Bible for themselves. So in 1642, they required parents to ensure their children's ability to read, and they passed this act. And the religious basis of the act was explicit. The act stated its intention was to thwart the old deluder Satan in his goal, which is to keep men from the knowledge of the scriptures. And then these educators took over with their aim to keep men from the knowledge of the scriptures. That is?
Quick question from our Kitsune. Would you recommend buying that book, the one on the education system?
Yeah, it might be very, very useful. Apparently, it had a huge impact on the homeschooling movement. But look, I mean, education is never at a loss if it's helpful. So I'll do a couple more slides on this, and then so Charles Francis Potter, is it religion? Education is the most powerful ally of humanism, and every American public school is a school of humanism. What can the theistic Sunday schools, meeting for an hour once a week and teaching only a fraction of the children due to stem the tide of a 5-day program of humanistic atheistic teaching. This is a very important man within the school of atheism. Right? He founded the first humanist church in New York City in 1929. In his book, Humanism, A New Religion in 1930, he said, humanism is not simply another denomination of Protestant Christianity. It is a new type of religion. It is a new way of looking at religion. And notice he says here, we have to redefine, you have to broaden your definition. We have to change the definition. So, is humanism a religion, he says? It is both a religion and a philosophy of culture. So it is a religion. It's a new type, the fourth religion. So you had Christianity. Well, they said basically you had Roman Catholicism, you had Protestantism, and you had Judaism, right? And now you had the fourth religion, the new one, to replace them all. So, yeah, this was his view. And notice, again, Free Inquiry, this atheist magazine, states in 1984, I'm convinced that the battle for humankind's future must be waged and won in the public school classroom by teachers who correctly perceive their role as the proselytizers of a new faith. You need to be very concerned about this because these people view their role as, these are radical secular humanists. These are radical fundamentalists, radical secular fundamentalists. These are religiously fundamentalists. And they see themselves as the caretakers of your kids. We're seeing the woke thing today in schools. These teachers must embody the same selfless dedication as the most rabid fundamentalist preachers. For they will be ministers of another sort, utilizing a classroom instead of a pulpit to convey humanist values in whatever subject they teach. Wokeness must be in everything, regardless of the educational level, preschool, daycare, or large state university. The classroom must and will become an arena of conflict between the old and the new. This is the dialectic. This is the Marxist dialectic. The old phase moving to the new phase, and there will be conflict. And then the new phase will take over, will defeat through violence, the old phase. This is the Marxist socialist dialectic. So there will be an arena of conflict between the old and the new, the rotting corpse of Christianity and the new faith of humanism. This guy, Gerald A. LaRue, very important name. Let's have a look at what Free Inquiry does. Thaddeus, your thoughts before I go on. Yeah.
Related comment from Nicholas. I'm really worried about the infiltration of the progressives in the church. Right now, the church here in Sweden seems to be mostly concerned about how they can be as politically correct as possible. And I get these confused since I'm doing them both on Lloyd's channels and this one. So I don't know if we looked at it here or not, but one of Lloyd's slides shows that the early socialists had explicit desires to infiltrate the church. That
and they had, no, they claimed they had already done so.
Yeah, they're right. They claimed that they had done so. So my point is that the concern is 100% legitimate, that there are people who want to commandeer Christianity to serve their own purposes. They want to replace the actual gospel message with a new gospel message, if you like, of their own creation. They want to make something else central to the Christian faith. They want to make it about, peace and love, or as they would put it, or, as we would put it, wokeism.
Yeah. This is, notice, Lenin spoke of the propaganda of atheism, the investigation of un-American propaganda activities in the United States hearings, Special Committee on Un-American Activities, House of Representatives, 75th Congress, HRS 282. You may be interested in knowing that we have preachers active in churches who are members of the Communist Party. If you're a member of the Communist Party, you must be an atheist. You cannot belong to a religion because those two views are diametrically opposed. This is from Earl Browder, General Secretary of the Communist Party USA, to students at the Union Theological Seminary in 1935. This is part of the transcript of the discussion. Mr. Congressman, they have taken over not only the Patriots and the Constitution, but also the Bible. You do not mean to say that the Communist Party today is working in the churches? I would boldly say that on the basis of their very widespread appeal to the churches. Have you any statements by any leaders of the Communist Party or any documentary evidence that they are trying to infiltrate into our churches? I have Earl Browder's book, Communism in the United States, which contains an address which he delivered at the Union Theological Seminary. You may be interested in knowing that we have preachers active in churches who are members of the Communist Party. So maybe you want to have a look at Union Theological Seminary and see if they're actually kind of really a Christian seminary, or maybe they're just teaching Marxism. You never know.
Well, there you go. I previewed the upcoming slide accidentally.
Yeah. No. I went and found it for you specifically.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So I'll just finish here with this, and then maybe we'll jump to. So hold on, 78. I just need to go back to 78. Let me do that. I went too far. Okay, so these guys, let's have a quick look here at this magazine. So this is the most popular atheist magazine in the US from American Humanist Association. Deconstructing Religion. Now, critical race theory deconstructs race. This is all deconstructionism. This is Marxism. 6 leading researchers have learned far more about faith than you probably expect. The meaning of humanism. Tom Flynn along the free thought trails. Oh, Tom Flynn's back. This is the same guy that said, hey guys, people are perceiving us as religion and we need to do propaganda to tell people we're not a religion. Same guy. Let's have a look here. Free inquiry. Humanism and suicide, a positive view. That's great. Positive view of suicide. Marx had a positive view of suicide, just so you know. 2 of his daughters murdered themselves, and apparently he didn't exactly, cry a river over that. So yeah, positive view of suicide. Thanks. Euthanasia. Well, Canada's just decided you want to kill yourself, go ahead. We'll even make you pay for it in the hospital. Knock yourself out. Why the Bible is so poorly written. Oh, the essay salon censored. Oh, fantastic. Thanks, guys.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm Salon's not exactly known for being a conservative organization. I'm guessing if they didn't publish it, it's because it was a poorly written piece of crap, not because of the content.
Yeah, notice.
Just a thought.
Yeah, and Robin Blumner, blame religion, not just Trump. Religion is bad. Okay, fine. And of course, special blasphemy issue. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it, guys. So yeah, this is the kind of thing that these guys write. And yeah, so notice those who signed the Humanist Manifesto disclaim that they are setting forth a binding credo. We sign this, but it doesn't mean that we actually will adhere to this. We're just signing it because God knows why. So yeah, that's this. So I'll kind of wind down here, but yeah, this is how committed they are because they'll change their minds tomorrow because the science changes. The science will change. So yeah. Yeah, so Thaddeus, I guess I wonder I'll probably won't. Yeah, I'll leave this one here, and then we can just introduce like my next topic.
Okay.
But that I think covers the essentials. So what are your thoughts on all of this?
Yeah, well, that last thought of yours there, that they'll change their mind because the science changes, which what they won't do though is change their mind about their core principles, regardless of what science says. So when we don't have any scientific evidence for their worldview, no problem. Science will catch up with us. When,
Yeah.
when something new in science can be used to promote something that they want to believe in, well, then we're just going with the science. Very contradictory there, very hypocritical, perhaps is a better word.
Exactly that. So yeah, how long have we been going now? Because I don't want to go too long.
We've been going about an hour and a half or so.
So maybe it's good to call it here. So yeah, guys, I did this is like an introduction and overview of atheism and its different manifestations and some of its history and some of its general beliefs. And then the other slides that I have, obviously the first portion covered the very first secular atheist state, which was France, of all places, under the French Revolution. And it didn't bring peace, it didn't take away war, it was murderous, immoral, and completely irrational. Science changes. Men can become women and women can become men. Exactly. This is what we're dealing with now. Thanks, atheists.
Yeah, except that would be a good example of being non-scientific. Scientifically speaking, it's pretty unambiguous who is a male and who is a female. But, you just create something else and you pretend that it's science. Follow whatever you desire and call it science, I think would be the way to put it.
So look, understand, guys, atheists have practiced the propaganda of atheism. They've taken Lenin and Marx to heart, and they've really practiced the propaganda of atheism, as you've seen. And they are weaknesses. They realize they're a religion, but they, of course, can't let people know that. But legally speaking, in the US, now Brits might say, well, I don't know what's happening in the US. Look, dude, they're still part of your religion. You all call yourselves atheists. You need to maybe go talk to your friends there. Aren't they not real atheists? Right? So understand, atheism has an agenda. It has doctrine. Nothing to do with true science. Exactly. It's scientism. This is entirely, yeah, it's just like Islam is science, science of hadith, like science of broken telephone. It's just dumb. Atheism has blood in its hands. Atheism has ridiculously irrational ideas on its hands, stupidly laughable ideas. And I mean, one fine day, if I ever get the chance to maybe speak with Nuria Khan again, I'd like to, she's a secular humanist. Maybe I'd say, do you understand the history and the statements of the prophets of secular humanism? Let's go through the foundation, the founding of secular humanism. Let's go read what your founders have said. Let's go read what they've done, what they want socially and politically. She might not like what she finds, but she claims that we're founded on science, right? So, I mean, you need to ask them, like, is that as so your mom said she loved you. Is that a scientifically testable idea? Is that, you said you love your mom. Is that based on science? This cake was good. Is that based on science? You like biryani. Is that based on science? Is that a scientific belief? I mean, it's just stupid. That is, yeah.
Yeah, Bill Hesfer said nothing to do with true science, and that's because true science is not atheistic. Science doesn't take a position on theological matters. So when the atheists try to claim that they're following science, then they don't have any position on God at all, apparently. Of course, what they're really trying to do is commandeer science to give their own ideas credibility. They're not really interested in what science has to say per se. They're just trying to commandeer it to make themselves appear credible, not unlike what the Muslim does, in fact.
Yeah.
Anna said, go ahead.
No, Islam used to play on ignorance. We were ignorant of Islamic sources. Now we're better than any Muslim when it comes to Islamic sources. We know their stuff backwards, better than they do. Bill Harrisford just said, how's the Big Bang considered science? Completely untestable. Don't forget, atheists also rely on your ignorance, just like Islam. They rely on your ignorance. This is a discussion we can have another time. I've got plenty of notes. We'll be doing plenty of stuff, but you need to understand atheism is laughably stupid. It is literally 6th century BC paganism with the label science slapped on it and then sent out the door naked. That's all it is.
Definitely.
Quite bluntly, what atheism is. It's an old set of ideas. It's an old set of stupid pagan ideas from 2,600 years ago, prettied up with some lipstick stuck on the pig, sent out the door, and off you go. That's all it is.
Yes. From Anna, juicy history right there. This can be great videos for homeschooling. We appreciate the feedback, Anna. Definitely take and use this material however it serves you. Along the lines of what you just said, Lloyd, from Marian, humanism is like Abdulism. It's brimming with internal contradictions. So they can appear to have an answer no matter who points out a problem with their cult. It's if they were easily distracted as well.
Yeah. So understand, Christianity created the scientific revolution. The scientific revolution is as a result of Christian thinking, that there's an order and a logic in the universe. Don't forget, in Islam, they believe that Allah controls everything. Allah literally manipulates the raindrops, every atom's movement, everything that occurs. When you kick the ball, Allah made you kick the ball. When the ball hits the guy, instead of going to the goal, when it smacks the guy in the head, Allah did that. Allah does literally everything. Right? According to their worldview, you are simply responsible for accepting the blame. How are you then responsible? See, this removes, this puts them. And so Muslims, understand, here's an issue. Muslims discuss free will, just like atheists talk constantly about free will. I mean, they live as if they have free will. They talk as if free will is a thing, but actually they don't believe in free will at all. So therefore their ideas are irrational. They're not even following their own ideas. They're not even living according to their own principles, right? So this is completely stupid. Even Islam does not have the concept of free will. So it is completely dumb. Yeah?
Yeah, we pointed out a number of connections between Islam and atheism throughout this, but I think that one's especially stark because they both, if you take the ideas seriously, if you take the Quran seriously, if you take materialism seriously, it's 100% no option of free will, 100% determinism. And yet all the adherents, or 99% whatever of the adherents to both, act as if free will is true. They talk as if free will is true. They believe as if free will is true.
And they blame you for making choices that are wrong.
Right. thus contradicting their own belief systems and showing that it's internally incoherent. A couple comments along the lines of what you said from Professor Yaffel. Science is a part of God's beautiful creation. And from Marion, that's rich given the fact that the scientific method came out of the Bible.
Yeah,
And
Christians
absolutely,
believe that the world was rational. There was a clock we have a clock because there was a clock maker. There's logic, right? And yet, so therefore, the world must be rational and understandable. And because if we are made in the image of God, our minds can start to perceive the creation of the Creator, the logic of the Creator. And this is what set the Christian world apart. This is why that revolution, that scientific revolution, happened within Christendom, not anywhere else. They all had all of the other things, but they didn't have the worldview that allowed them that revolution to take place. Sorry, Thaddeus.
Exactly. People in other parts of the world were just as intelligent as people in Europe. They, in many cases, had superior technology to that available in Europe. And yet they didn't develop a scientific worldview because they didn't have a Christian worldview. They did not believe that there was a logical principle behind the universe. They did not believe in a singular or logical God whose will does not change. Therefore, they had no reason to believe that the world could be examined in what we would now call science, because you do an experiment and then you do another experiment and things would change because the gods changed their minds. That is what all people expected apart from Christians, and that's why science arose in a Christian worldview and none other. And it doesn't actually work in an atheist worldview either, because if you think that if determinism is true, if everything is predetermined, then how are you making a choice to do scientific experiments?
Yeah. And if there's no logic, there's no point in studying this stuff because there's no rational rules that can be deduced. But don't forget, undirected, random processes created the world, created logic and order. Now, here's the thing. We're working on computers. You guys are looking at us through a computer and a cell phone or whatever the case might be. Imagine an irrational, undirected, non-logical process created that phone, created that computer. Would you trust it? Imagine your brain is the result of an irrational, unguided, unscientific, totally random process. Can you trust your brain? No. I mean, it wouldn't make sense. You can see that these things are the function or the product of design, of logical, coherent design. So therefore, we trust them. We can sense that this is based on free will is essential in Islam. No. According to Orthodox Islam, there is zero free will. Allah controls everything. The groups that promoted free will in Islam were called the Qadariyah and the Mutazilites. And basically, to solve the question, the debate between free will and determinism, the deterministic guys had their opponents murdered. They killed them all because that's what you do to win the debate. So
in Islam,
yeah.
you do.
Sorry.
I said in Islam you do, but I want to give Ben some credit here. He's right that if Islam makes sense, then free will has to be a thing. He says life is a test, therefore choices need to be made. Yes, that is logically correct, but here's the problem. Your God disagrees. Your God tells you over and over again in his so-called eternal word that you don't have a choice, that he determines who he wants to lead and who he doesn't want to lead. He leads some people to hell, leads some people to heaven, and that's all there is to it. And indeed, the early Muslims understood this well. They understood that even if it looked like everything was going great and they were going to Jannah, if Allah's decree was for them to go to hell, it didn't make the bit of difference. They could get right up to the edge of heaven, and Allah would say, nope, my decree is for you to go to hell, and you'd end up in hell. The only way you could actually know that you were going to Jannah is if you were there. Until you were there, there was no possible way to know. This is what the early Muslims believed. This is what they said. They understood their scripture. You are smarter than them. You understand that that doesn't make any sense, that makes God immoral, horrible creature. Yet here you are instead of rejecting that God, rejecting what the Quran says.
Now he just says Kharijites. Like, you see, they're relying on your ignorance. Muslims and atheists rely on your ignorance. The thing is this: we are not going to stay ignorant forever. At this point, I know Islam better than any Muslim I've ever met, right? Except maybe someone who spent 7 years at Al Azhar getting his PhD or whatever. However, atheists need to realize there's a lot more to atheism than they realize, and we are onto them. This idea of the Kharijites. Now, you might be really intrigued to know this, but just yesterday I was spending time working on this exact problem, this whole question of free will in Islam, and I'm busy putting together slides on that. You never know. I went through a whole bunch of sources yesterday on who were the Kharijites, who were the Qadariya, who were the Jabariya. So how about you, Benz? Just put the word the Jabariya and then put Qadariya and then put Mutazili with question mark, just so you sound smart, right? And you know what? When I have that talk, you come back and I'll make you look stupid. I'll be happy to do that for you because I'm going to know way more than you do, you see, because I'm actually going to do the research based on your own Islamic sources. We're going to have that discussion one fine day. It's coming, don't worry.
Ben's, listen more carefully, okay? You wrote, but you make a decision of belief through logic. Isn't that a choice? Yes, it is. Again, the problem isn't that you don't have free will. The problem is that your dumb God thinks you don't have free will and claims you don't. So what you're telling me is that you know better than your God.
He does. Yeah, apparently so.
He doesn't seem to think that there's a problem because he knows the way the world actually works, that he actually does have a choice. He actually does have free will, and that if Islam were a moral system, it would have to allow for that, because otherwise the guy would just be arbitrarily punishing people for things he caused them to do. Yet Allah contradicts him. Allah says over and over again that I guide who I will, I misguide who I will.
Allah guides you to sin, but you're to blame for what you were made to do by Allah. Allah guided you to the sin. This is stupid and incoherent. So understand, Benz, you are contradicting Allah himself. You are contradicting your own scholars. So we'll be talking about this in the future. Don't worry, there's plenty to read about and write about this.
Yep. Benz, I hope you subscribe and you pay attention, because we'll have a whole show on this subject just for you.
Yeah, I spent some time last night on this. I spent some time earlier in the week or last week on it as well. I've been looking into this one. I've been going through the sources. We're gonna be going through this in detail from your own sources. It's gonna be fun. Yeah.
And isn't that interesting how the providence of the true God works? That we obviously didn't know you're going to come in here and try to say that Allah has allows you to have free will, that Islam needs free will, and yet that's exactly the subject that we've been researching. Almost like there is a divine force trying to reach out to you. Just think about that.
I just want to mention one thing, if I may. Just so you know, this is a YouTube Wikipedia, Wakipedia. Yeah, you got to be very careful with Wakipedia. Understand? Especially, remember I did that thing on Jagged 86, a Muslim who had falsified thousands. I think they falsified 66,000 articles on Wikipedia by falsely adding by falsifying Islamic information. So this was like over 10 years. This guy went and falsified 66,000 major Wikipedia articles regarding Islam. So, with Islamic science and various other subjects. So you got to be careful with Wikipedia. But look at this. The idea that science and religion, science and Christianity specifically, are antithetical is a new idea that was started in the late 1800s, 1880s, by Julian Huxley or Aldous Huxley. He deliberately created the propaganda of atheism that the church and that Christianity are antithetical to science. But this is absolutely false. This is a completely false idea. Although it's part of the major propaganda. But list of Catholic clergy scientists. Okay, this is on Wikipedia. There's a list here from A to Z. So they actually have external links, but they had to make it into a list because the list is so long. From Nicolaus Copernicus, right? Roger Bacon, and so on. I mean, this list is extremely long. That's A, that's B. These are the known Catholics who were involved in science. And the church was the biggest funder of science of the day. The church built universities. So the church was a patron of the sciences. And just like to say, what about the Spanish Inquisition? What about the crusades. This is all they have. But we can go through, what about the 52 atheist genocides of the 20th century alone? Okay, 52 genocides of the 20th century, the atheist genocides alone. Well, and that's a long list, and we can go back further than that, right? So they've only got these two things, and they keep on hammering on them. But once we look into those, and we will, then we'll realize atheism has a lot to answer for. But notice there is a lot. The church was heavily involved in science in a way more than you realize. And also, do you know that people claim that that Christianity is antithetical to science? But if you look at what is interesting, you go through the Nobel Prize winners of the last 100 years, because Christians are irrational, right? That is, Christians are utterly irrational, and Christians are anti-science, correct?
Yeah, that's what we're told anyway.
So have a look, for those atheists who may listen, have a look at, do me a favor, count the number of Nobel Prize winners of the last, I don't know, 100 years or whatever, and tell me how many were Christians. Just have a look. Just have a look. Tell me if it's more than 1%, more than 2%, more than 50%, more than 60%, more than 65%. Just have a look, please. Just have a check, because somehow, for some reason, these irrational Christians win a lot of Nobel Prizes. I'll let you figure out the percentage, but that is your thoughts on that. You know, how these irrational Christians have won more than 50, I'll just leave it at more than 50% for now of the Nobel Prizes.
Yeah, and what's also interesting is that the group that's most overrepresented is Jewish people, who are also, of course, believing in the same irrational, totally bogus God that Christians are believing in.
Yeah. And the Jews are what, 0.2%, less than 0.2% of world population, and they've won like 25% of all Nobel Prizes. And the Muslims are like, I don't know, there's like what, 8 billion Muslims, right? And they represent like 40% of the world population, and they've got less than 1% of Nobel Prizes because they're literally anti-science. So yeah, so that's it from me, guys, and that's everything.
Yep.
So hopefully,
Just real quick to close out on the Ben's comments. RJ said, Ibn Taymiyyah says logic, philosophy, and reason will lead to disbelief. Ben's wants to use logic, and Ibn Taymiyyah is right. That's why they're forbidden, and or at least highly discouraged in the Sharia, because logic and philosophy are contradictory to what Allah teaches. However, we're glad that you're here and you're
philosophy is
using
illegal
your
for Muslims
logic.
to study. I can show the Sharia quickly. It's actually illegal.
Yeah,
It's
go ahead
considered
and
on the
call
same
that up
level.
while I read Ben's comment here. Just out of curiosity, not of argument and stuff. It's cool to talk about it. I'm not competing in who's right or wrong. It's cool to get closer to the truth. And I agree with that sentiment 100%. Everyone should pursue truth. You should want to know what is true. If your belief system is true, if Islam is true, then you have nothing to be afraid of when you look into it. If Islam is not true, then you should want to know that as well. Everyone should want to pursue the truth. And we're glad that you are here doing just that. I hope you stick around. I hope you watch future shows. We do a lot of careful analysis of evidence on this channel. We're not so much into, making jokes and making fun of things. We're mostly here about in-depth study of evidence. Lloyd has pulled up the relevant laws on Sharia, or from the Sharia, I mean, here on the use of philosophy, on the use of rational thought. And if you want more on that, we have several presentations on the Sharia on this channel.
So the Reliance of the Traveler, as everyone knows, this is the most common, the most popular Islamic law manual in the world, in the Sunni world. And it says that unlawful knowledge, what is haram, unlawful knowledge includes learning sorcery as number one. Sorcery is bad. And number two, philosophy. Then we have magic and astrology. So this is real. Philosophy is very, very bad. Lay Muslims are not allowed to learn philosophy because, you see, have a notice here, anything that is a means to create doubts. You see, in eternal truths. In other words, eternal truths are what the Sharia tells you is true. So, and philosophy, thinking about things too much can make you have doubts. And philosophy is on the same level as sorcery. It's insane. So yeah, just wanted to share that.
Yeah, and then elsewhere in that same source, there's a line that along the lines of what is befitting for the common Muslim is to do what he's told and not investigate things for himself.
Yeah.
That's not word for word, but that's the gist of it. That these things, advanced things like philosophy and rational thinking and education and evidence, those are all things that are reserved for the scholars. The common Muslim, he doesn't want to worry about any of that stuff because he's not, super cool like the scholars who can learn all this stuff and still retain their Islamic faith. The common Muslim, if he learns this stuff, he's going to leave Islam, and we cannot have that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, guys, that's everything from me. So understand that. I mean, I've got no particular hatred of atheists, just like I have no particular hatred of Muslims. I just discuss this stuff and it annoys people. We actually, yeah, I mean, we have no animosity towards these people. Now, look, I am guilty of sarcasm. I will say that I am highly guilty. But
No, we've never heard any sarcasm from you, Lloyd.
yeah, but I react very badly when people poke me. So this is just, guys. I bring evidence. I bring reams of evidence. I bring mountains of evidence. So, so atheism has, there are things to be asked and there are things to be discussed with regards to atheism. And atheists have a lot to answer for. You are not a pure religion. You're not a pure, unadulterated, unaffected, pure philosophy. No. Atheism is a gateway to evil, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we started this series, I, of course, thought atheism was internally incoherent. I thought that it was um, clearly wrong, but I had no idea the level of similarity between the way Muslims think about the world and the way atheists think about the world. I would say the chief difference is that the atheist is extremely arrogant. They typically, of course, I'm generalizing here, that the typical atheist is extremely arrogant. They think they know everything. They think that they are following the evidence. They want to believe that they're the rational beings who are just, getting beyond religion. Whereas the average Muslim is very humble. They know that they don't know a lot. They know that they're submitting. They know that they're just following. And of course, they view that as a good thing. But in reality, I found that the average atheist really doesn't know a whole lot either. That the average atheist is following something as incoherent as Islam, and they simply are arrogant and haven't actually looked at any evidence or have looked at very little evidence. So in the end, I don't see a lot of differences other than in attitude.
Yeah, so there's a lot more to unpack here. We'll be discussing more about atheism. So the next show we'll talk about is a series of like 36 academic references discussing the definition of atheism. Because Muslims, yeah, you may as well call them what the heck, Muslim-atheisms or whatever. Constantly tell us it's just a lack of belief. Well, every single academic source, every single one disagrees with that. But of course, I guess we're going to get told, just like Abdul's, that's not my scholar. So yeah, in fact, I have been told that. So anyway, so yeah, that's next. Perhaps we might stream tomorrow. I don't know, Thaddeus. Are you open to that, or?
Yeah. I think that maybe we'll be on your channel tomorrow.
Yeah,
Is
we
that
might
what
do
you're
that.
looking?
So yeah, I'll update you.
All right.
Um,
Yep. So look for an announcement. We haven't worked
what
out the
time
exact
works best for you?
details.
What time works best for you?
Uh, 1 p.m. Eastern, which is 7 p.m. for you, is fine. That's what we've done a few times. Or after that, anytime from there after. Earlier than that, it'd be interfering with lunch or church, but anywhere from there after.
Okay, yeah, after one, so I can probably, yeah. So, okay, guys, so I'll introduce this. Yeah, but thank you guys very much for your time. I hope you've learned something useful. Um, don't let atheists give you a hard time. I know they're very aggressive, they're incredibly militant, but yet, just like Muslims, they want to constantly attack the Bible, attack Jesus. They don't want to discuss atheism. Muslims don't want to discuss Islam. And we now have the weapons to turn this conversation around and say, hold on, let's talk about your religion instead. And it's a very, very dirty underbelly immediately. So yeah, guys, I think this puts us in a really strong position. We need to understand our enemy. I mean, some of them are. They are very much operating according to very strict doctrine. Atheism is a doctrine. It is a religion. So thanks, guys. Good night. And that's all for me. Yeah.
Yep.
That is.
So yes, Nicholas, there will be a stream on Lloyd's channel tomorrow, God willing. So look for an announcement about that as far as the exact time. I will be back myself this evening at 7:30 Eastern Time on the Reason to Worship channel with my weekly Bible study. Thank you all for joining us today. Have a great week. God bless.
God bless, guys. Thank you very much. Good night.